Hello and welcome back to another tutorial. In today's episode, we're going to be covering data generation, which will allow us to automate the creation of some JSONs. We're going to be automating block states, language, item models, and block models for the assets, as well as tags, recipes, and loot tables for the data. So let's begin by creating a new package. Right-click on our main package and go to New Package, and let's name this Data Gen. Inside this package, let's right-click and create a new class, and let's call it Tutorial Data Generation. Next, we want to annotate this class with an event bus subscriber so that we can register our data generators when they need to be registered. Let's add a @mod.eventBusSubscriber and press Ctrl-Shift-O to import @mod. Let's set the mod ID to be our tutorial mod.modID, and let's set the bus to be equal to bus.mod. Let's once again press Ctrl-Shift-O to import bus, and now we can register our generators. Let's create a public static void called gatherData, and this is going to take a gatherData event. And in order to make sure that it's run, we need to annotate it with an @subscribe event. Next, let's get the data generator. So let's do data generator is equal to event.getGenerator, and then we can check if event.includeClient. And then here we're going to do client data generation. And we're also going to check if event includes server. And here we're going to do server data generation. So everything in here will be our resource pack generation, and everything in here will be our data pack generation. So let's start with our block state. In our data gen, let's create a new package called .client. And in here, let's create a new class called modBlockStateProvider. And this class is going to extend blockStateProvider. And we want to make sure to use the net.minecraftforge.client.model.generators. Let's hover over this and add a constructor. Let's rename gen to generator. We can remove the mod ID and change the existing file helper to just be helper. Then over here we can change the generator to generator, the helper to helper, and the mod ID to our tutorial mod.modID. Next, let's hover over this and add unimplemented methods, which is going to add our register states and models. And in here we're going to register all of our models and block states. So I'm going to start by creating a simple block, and this block is going to be block_init.example_block.get. And all this is going to do is generate a simple block state for our example block. And you can see there's other things that you can override, including configured models and custom model files, but we're not going to do that in this video, otherwise it will be very long. Now we need to register our mod block state provider, and we can do that in here. In our include client, we can write generator.addProvider, and then we just pass in a new mod block state provider. This is going to take our generator and a file helper. So to get the file helper, let's create a new existing file helper called helper and set this equal to event.getExistingFileHelper. Now we can just pass that helper into here, and there we go. Now we've created a model and block state for our example block. And if you want to add more, you can always add more lines over here for different blocks. You can also change the simple block to be a function of your choosing, but I'm just going to leave this as simple block for now. Next, let's cover item models. In our client, let's create a new class called modItemModelProvider. And once again, this is going to extend ItemModelProvider. We can hover over this and add a constructor. Once again, we can rename this to the helper, remove the mod ID, change this mod ID over here to tutorial mod.modID, and this bit over here to just be helper. Now I can hover over this and add our registered models. However, I'm going to create a couple of custom methods which will help us over here, which aren't included by default. So let's create a protected void called simpleBlockItem, and this is going to take an item. And then we're going to do getBuilder, and then we need a path, so we can do item.getRegistryName.toString. And then we can do .parent, and here we need to pass in a model file. So here we're getting the builder for the item, and then inside that item model, we're going to need to define a parent. And our parent is just going to be the model of that block. So now we need to get the model of the block. And to do that, we use getExistingFile. Now we just need to pass in the file for our block. And that's going to be mod location, so that's using our custom mod ID of block slash plus the registry name of our block. So that's item.getRegistryName.getPath. And remember that in this case, our item is our block, because all blocks are actually items, but not all items are blocks. Now let's create a protected void called onLayerItem, which is going to be our default model for all our items. And this is going to take in a item and a resource location for the texture. We can press Ctrl-Shift-O to import resource location, and then we can create a new resource location for our item texture. And this is going to be a new resource location with texture.getNamespace, comma, item slash plus texture.getPath. And that is the resource location of the texture, which we're going to need to use in the model. And now we're going to check if this texture exists. So we're going to do existingFileHelper.exists. Then we pass in our item texture, and we're going to type packtype.clientResources. Then we need the extension of the file, that's a .png, and we're going to search in textures, since this is a texture. And if it doesn't exist, we can just do system.out.println texture for plus item.getRegistryName.toString not present at item texture.toString. And now over here, we're going to do something similar to what we have over here. So we can just copy paste this to get our builder. Except now, instead of converting it to a string, we're going to do .getPath. And then we want to set the parent to Minecraft item generated. So to do that, we can do parent of getExistingFile. And then we do mclock, since this is a Minecraft model. And then we can do item/generated. And that's going to set the parent. Now we can set the texture at layer 0, which is the main layer, to our item texture. And now we've created our onLayerItem. Next, I'm just going to make the exact same method, so onLayerItem, but this is only going to take an item. And all this is going to be is to call onLayerItem again with the item and item.getRegistryName. Now in our register model, we can call all of these things. So we can do simple block item for our block init.exampleBlock.get.asItem, and then we can do the exact same thing for our rotatable block. And now we can do our simple items. To do that, we're going to create a onLayerItem for item init.exampleItem.get. And now we've created item models for our blocks and item models for our items. And if we compare what this does to what it makes, we can see that we're first getting the builder for our item, then we're setting the parent to a Minecraft location of item/generated, so that's this, and then we're adding a texture at layer 0 with our item texture, and that's this variable over here. And a similar thing is happening for our simple block item. Next, let's create a language provider. So in our client, I'm going to create a new package called lang, and then I'm going to create a new class called mod-enus-provider. And you're going to need to make a new provider for each language that you choose. And this is going to extend a language provider, and then we can hover over this and add all of this in. Instead of the mod ID and the locale, mod ID is going to be equal to tutorial mod.modID. And the locale here is going to be en_us, since this is our mod enus provider. Then we can hover over this and click add to add our translations. And now we can add our translations for literally anything. We can add blocks and items as keys. So for example, we can do add item, so we can do item init.exampleItem.get, and then set that equal to example item. We can also do similar things for blocks by just changing this over here to block init.exampleBlock.get and this to example block. Also in our lang file we have item groups, but you can see that they aren't actually here in one of the methods. So we can just do add, and we can do item group dot tutorial mod, which is the name of our item group in our lang JSON. And we can set that equal to tutorial mod tab. So just as you can use this default stuff, you can also create your own keys. Next, let's register our item and language provider in our data generator. So let's do generator.add_provider, new mod item model provider with generator and helper, and then generator.add_provider with new mod enus provider. And there we go. Now we have data generation for our client. Next, let's move on to the server. Let's start with recipes. So in our data gen package, let's create a new package called .server. And then in here, let's create our new class called mod recipe provider. And this is going to extend recipe provider. Let's hover over this and add a constructor. This is going to take a data generator called generator. Then let's overwrite build crafting recipes. And this is just going to take a consumer, and we don't need to call the super. Let's start with shaped recipes. So let's do shaped recipe builder dot shaped, and then we can pass in an item as the result. So let's say this is going to be our example item. Then we need to set the keys. So we can define a character with an ingredient. So for example, let's define the letter A as block init dot example block dot get dot as item. And we want to make sure to use single speech marks here, since this is a character. Let's now define another character, which is going to be B, and this is going to take taginit.items.cool_items, which means that B is going to accept any cool item. Now that we've defined this, we can now add our pattern. And to do that, we just add pattern. And to do that, you can picture our shaped recipe over here. So the first line of the pattern is going to be this, the second line is that, and the second line is the third one, and I explained how this works in the last episode. So I'm going to say the first line is going to be ABA, and the second line is going to be BAB, and the third line is also going to be ABA. You can use the save function to finally complete this recipe. And to do that, you're going to need the consumer passed into the function and a resource location. And this is going to be a new resource location of tutorial mod.modid, and then the name of the recipe. So I'm just going to put the output of our item as the name of the recipe. So item init.example item.get registry name .get path. And if you want, you can add something onto that, for example, underscore hello. And now that's going to use the registry name of the item underscore hello as the name of the recipe. And you can use that to stop conflicting. But I'm going to remove that for now. Next, let's create a shapeless recipe with shapeless recipe builder. And then let's do .shapeless. Now we need the output. And if you want multiple items, you can always add a number after this. So this is going to give us 10 example items. This shapeless one is going to give us example blocks. So let's do block init.example_block.get.as_item. And this is going to give 4 of them. If you only want one, you can just not have a number over here. All you need to do to shapeless recipes is to add ingredients. And to do that, you can do .requires. And then you can once again pass in anything that you like. These can be blocks, items, tags, etc. So I'm going to say that to make our example block, we're going to need 3 example items. So item init.example_item.get. So I'm going to need 3 of those. And then I'm going to need 1 diamond. So let's do items.diamond. And there we go. Now we need to save that, so let's do .save, and this is exactly the same as before. So this is going to take a consumer and a new resource location of tutorial mod.modid, and then we can give it a name. So I'm going to do block init.example_block.get registry name.get path. And that is our shapeless recipe. So now with 3 example items and a diamond, we're going to get 4 example blocks. Finally, I'm going to briefly show a cooking recipe. So let's do simple cooking recipe builder, and then we can do a blasting, campfire, cooking, or smelting, or even smoking. I'm just going to do smelting over here. Then we pass in the input and the output. So I'm going to say a block init.rotatable_block.get.as_item can smelt into a item init ingredient.example_item.get. However, this first bit has to be an ingredient, so we can do ingredient.of, and then put this bit into brackets. Then we give it the experience, so let's say 1 experience orb, and the cooking time. So let's say 200 ticks. Remember, there are 20 ticks in 1 second. Next, we can save that with our consumer and a new resource location of tutorialmod.modid and the name of our output. But here, as you can see, the recipe name will be the same as our first one, so on the end we can add _smelting just so that they don't conflict. But you don't have to do this if your recipe names are going to be different. Next, let's register our mod recipe provider. So back in tutorial data generation, we can go here and do generator.add_provider with new mod recipe provider and pass in our generator. Next, let's create block and item tags providers. So let's create a new class called mod block tags provider, and this is going to extend block tags provider. Then you want to hover over the error and add the constructor that has the mod ID and the file helper. Let's rename the data generator to generator, delete the mod ID, and change the existing file helper to just helper. Then over here we can do the same thing, change the mod ID to tutorial.modid, and change this to just helper. Next we can override @tags. We can delete the super, and in here we can add our tags. In here you can create a new tag, and then you pass in a block tag. So you can do tag init.blocks.coolblocks, and then .add, and then add as many blocks as you want. So for example, if I want to add a acacia button to that, I can do something like this. And then if I want to also add my own block onto that, I can do block init.rotatableBlock.get. And I can just chain these on to create my tag. I can also do that with a default Minecraft tag. So I can do tags.blocks.dirt. And I can say that my rotatable block is actually a dirt. And that's it for our block tags. Next, let's create a new class called mod item tags provider. And this is going to extend item tags provider. And then we can hover over this and add the second constructor, which has a file helper. Now we can delete the mod ID, but here we also get a block tags provider. Let's do generator, blocks, and helper. And then rename the super stuff to generator, blocks, tutorialmod.modid, and helper. Now once again we can overwrite @tags, and this actually works in the exact same way as before. So you can do tag of tags.items.barrels and then add stuff to the barrel tag so that I can say my rotatable block is a barrel. However, this is a block, so I need to use as item here since I'm making an item tag. Now let's register this in our data generation class. However, we're going to need to store our block generator somewhere, so over here we can do mod block tags generator, and then we can do block tags is equal to a new mod block tags provider, and then we pass in the generator and the helper. And now over here we can do generator.add_provider, and then we can add the block tags, and then we can do generator.add_provider with a new mod item tags provider with generator, block tags, and helper. Finally, let's do our mod loot table provider. So let's create a new class called mod loot table provider, and this is one of those moments where we're just going to have to copy and paste some code. This is quite a big chunk of code because unfortunately a loot table provider doesn't exist properly in Forge, but this loot table provider is going to be the same for every mod that has loot tables. So don't worry about changing stuff, there will be a link in the description, and this original code was made by MerkJitty. So in my datagen package, I'm going to create a new class called base loot table provider, and then I'm going to copy and paste the code. And you want to make sure to leave this class abstract, and then we can press Ctrl+Shift+O and import the log4j logger, the Minecraft data provider, the world item, the Java path, the Minecraft block, the log4j log manager, and Java util map. And that should fix all of the errors in this class. Now we can save that, and in our mod loot table provider, we can extend our base loot table provider. Then we can hover over this and add a constructor, which just takes our generator. So we can rename that over here. And then we can hover over this and add unimplemented methods, which is going to add tables. Now in the add tables function, we can add our tables. Let's create a simple table with our block. So block init.example block.get, .get registry name .get path. And in here, we'll just pass in block init.example block.get. We can even simplify this by creating a protected void, drop self, which will take in a block. And this is just going to do create simple table with block.get registry name .get path and block. And now instead of this, we can call drop self and pass in block init.example block.get. We can also do the same thing for our rotatable block, or we can do a silk touch. So let's create a silk touch table with block init.rotatable block.get registry name .get path. Next, we need to pass in the block, so that's our rotatable block.get. Next, it's the item that we drop if we don't silk touch it. So let's do item init.example item.get. Next is our minimum value with fortune, so let's say 1, and a maximum value of, let's say, 4. Finally, let's add this table provider into our tutorial data generation. So let's do generator.addProvider, new mod loot table provider, and then pass in the generator. And that is actually it. So I have completely gotten rid of our lang, so I'm just going to delete this lang that we have. In my block state provider, I created a simple block state for my example block, so I'm going to delete that. In my item model provider, I created item models for all of the 3 item models that we have, so I'm going to delete all the item models that we have. We're going to leave our textures. We're going to leave the Minecraft tags. For our loot tables, I'm going to delete the current block loot table that we have. We're going to leave the recipes, and we actually set the cool blocks, but not the cool items, so I'm just going to remove this line for cool blocks, and then keep the tags. And in our recipes class, we forgot to add criterion. So what we can do is do .unlockedBy, and then add a criterion. So we can do has underscore plus block init.example block.get registry name .get path. And for the criterion, we're going to put has, and then we need to pass in an item. So we can do block init.example block.get as item. And we can do the same thing over here, but this time instead of using that, we're going to use our example item, like so. And we can do the same thing for the cooking recipe, this time using the rotatable block. And what this criterion does is unlock this recipe when you have this item in your inventory. And let's just fix our base loot table provider. Let's create a public void called add, and this is going to take a block and a loot table dot builder. And all we're going to do here is do loot tables dot put the key and the builder. Now in our loot table provider, in drop self, all we have to do is add block colon and then the rest of the function. And then down here we can do protected void silk touch, and then we can do the block, the item silk, int min and int max. And what this is, it's the block that it drops, so it will drop itself, otherwise it's going to drop silk. So now we can do add block colon, and then we can copy all of this and paste it in here. Then we can change the rotatable block stuff to block, like here and here. We can change this bit to silk, this to min, and this to max. And then over here we can add silk touch with block init.rotatable block.get, and the item that it drops when it's mined with fortune is item init.example item.get with a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 1. Now we need to actually run our data generation. To do that, we can click the drop down next to the Run button and go to Run Configurations. Then we can select Run Data and click Run. And then when those are complete, you have to go to Source Generated Resources, right click on that, and click Refresh. Now we can run Client. This video is sponsored by MTX-Serve. MTX-Serve provide game server hosting for games such as Minecraft, Rust, and Valheim. The servers are incredibly performant with a AMD Ryzen 5800X and unlimited SSD storage space as well as DDoS protection. And all of this for a pretty low price. Use code CY4 to get 5% off your server today. So now if we start the game, we can see that all of the language files and the names of the blocks have loaded properly. We can also see that the loot tables have worked, so if I use Silk Touch on my rotatable block, I get my rotatable block. And if I use Fortune on it, you can see that I get a couple of my example items. Also, in my crafting table, you can see that I have a shapeless recipe with 3 of my example items and a diamond to make 4 example blocks. I can also use my example blocks with any cool item. Remember, that's my example item or a diamond to make 10 of my example items. And finally, I can smelt 1 of my rotatable blocks to be an example item. And this gives me 1 orb of experience. That's going to do it for this video. If you need any help, join the Discord, and the link for the data generation code is in the description. If you like my overall content, I just opened a Ko-fi, so you can go donate to that if you'd like to. In the next episode, I'll probably start covering tile entities, containers, and GUIs. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.